Welcome to April's What to Do Now in the Garden. Now I have to say, this is the most exciting month of the year for me. I think it's when the garden's at its most live, at its most vibrant, and it also presents you with the greatest amount of opportunities for creative tasks that you can do. Plants are really surging at this time of year, so it means that you can split and divide them and move them around. Of course, it's that window when you can sow absolutely masses of different things. There's all sorts of propagation opportunities. It's the time to turn your turf around and get the lawn looking fantastic again. So everything in the garden is at peak growth. There are so many useful and interesting things you can be getting on with, and let me show you just one of the tasks you can get creative with this month. April really is the time of year when the garden is surging and in absolute sort of maximum growth. Everything's really going for it, and that sort of surprisingly does present an opportunity for propagation and lots of extra free plants. What I'm talking about, of course, is splitting the likes of grasses and perennials. Now, you can do that with plants that you buy direct from the garden centre like these. So plants in 2 or 3 litre pots. I'm about to show you how you can do that. But you can also split a whole series of garden plants simply by digging out a chunk of soil from around the base with a mass of roots and a bit of growth at the top. You can plant that direct back into the garden. And what you'll find is that the plant is sort of mildly stunted, shocked for a couple of days, wondering what's going on. But because it's in that kind of surge state, it will quickly recover. It'll put out new roots, new growth, new foliage, and will establish really quickly in the garden. And that's sort of in contrast to if you did it in the autumn. So I'm always very much in favour of doing it at this time of year. Now, what I've got here is a fescue, a little blue Festuca glauca. I think this one is Elijah Blue. Useful little garden plant. Fairly costly, so I think there's a nice way you can save a whole load of money by splitting these plants down. Now, people favour different techniques. Some people like to use 2 forks back to back in the container. So you'd use 2 small hand forks. If you're splitting a plant in the border, you'd use 2 border forks, literally split the plant away. But in this instance, I want to get a really nice clean cut through this, and I reckon I can get 2, I mean it might even be 4 clumps of grass out of this, but I'm going to make this initial cut all the way through. Now, it might look a little bit radical, but it's going to work. So I'm just going to make the cut directly through the centre here. Now, there will be a little bit of sacrificial growth. In other words, there's going to be some stems close to the cut that won't make it. But what you're doing is essentially creating, so there's the bits that are not going to make it. There's no roots on there. However, the rest of that is good, ready to go. Good tuft of growth on the top, mass of roots binding all of this together. So you could put this back into a container, plant it up and grow it on. You could split it again and get 2 plants from this, or you could plant this direct into your border. However you do it, make sure you give it a good drink of water and keep it nice and moist for the first kind of 2 to 3 weeks so it can do its surge thing, put down those new roots, put up a whole load of new growth, and you'll have some plants for free. Got the perfect spot for one of these fescues. I'm going to tuck the other one elsewhere in the garden, but down here is nice and sunny, and it's going to sit in front of this Salvia caradonna. So deeper blues here, paler blues of this. And of course, what's so useful about this grass is that it's ever coloured. So it holds those kind of blue tones through the winter, nice kind of border fronter. Now it can go straight into the soil here, nicely firmed in. It's quite warm today, so what I'll do is to create a little soil moat around the top. And what that means is when I come to water it shortly, the water, rather than running off on the soil, will actually go direct into the roots. It's effectively just a small ridge of soil around the outside. And what that means is that when I come to water it later on, the water will go direct down into the roots and help the fescue to get established as quickly as possible. Now, I reckon I've got a good different home for this other fescue, and I've got another spot I'm going to put the hostas in. But stick around, there's a whole host of other spring jobs that you can be getting on with.
Potatoes are an incredibly rewarding crop to grow. If you've got a patch of ground in full sun that you can manure really well so it's really quite rich, you're bound, almost bound, to get a really good crop. But when you start looking at potatoes, and always buy seed potatoes because they're generally virus-free, they'll yield much better than those that have been growing under the sink, you'll find 3 different kinds: first earlies, second earlies and main crop. They're listed in order of ripening, if you like, in order of harvesting. The first earlies come quickly, they'll take 8 to 10 weeks, right down to the main crops, which will take up to 16 weeks. But with these, the earlies, the first earlies, and this is a variety called Accent, it's always a good idea to sprout your seed potatoes first. And you do that by popping them in egg boxes in a bright windowsill. They'll take a month or so to produce shoots like this, and the reason you want big shoots on them is that that tends to hasten cropping. With main crops, it doesn't matter, you can plant them as they are. The planting technique for both is the same. Take out a trench like this, which is about 9 inches deep, and space the seed potatoes out in the bottom. First earlies like these, about a foot apart. Main crops, where you can expect a heavier crop, you can space them about 18 inches apart, right the way along the trench. And then the earth that you've taken out, you put back over the top, just to tuck them in snugly, you know, just about 4 or 5 inches on the top of each of those tubers. And you'll notice that when you've finished, and I'm doing part the row here, it's in a dip. But it won't always be in a dip like that, because as the shoots push through, when they get through 2 or 3 inches, and because you're planting late March, April, sometimes right through into May, you might still get a frost. You want to make sure those shoots are protected from frost, and that's when you need to pull a bit more over. So as soon as those shoots are coming through, if frost threatens, cover them up with soil. There's another reason why we do this thing called earthing up, and that is to stop light getting at the tubers. Tubers that are exposed to sunlight go green. They're nasty tasting and they can be poisonous. And as these shoots grow, keep on piling this earth on top until you end up with a ridge running right the way down here and the foliage is coming out of the top. Make sure that during dry spells you give them a really good watering. How do you know when they're ready to harvest? Well, yes, you've got the kind of weekly thing, 8 to 10 for earlies, as I say, 16 weeks for main crop. Often when the plants flower is a good indicator that new tubers will have formed below, but the easiest thing to do is to get your hand out, scrape away and see if they're there, and then pull out 1 or 2 for those first early new potatoes, and they'll see you right the way through the year, with the main crops being storable in sacks so that you can even have them at Christmas. Happy planting.
One of the best things you can do for wild bees in your garden is to make a solitary bee nesting box, also known as a bee hotel. This is a really simple design comprising a box structure filled with hollow plant stems such as bamboo. We've also got forsythia in here, sunflower stems, anything that's hollow where bees can go in and make their nests. Unlike bumblebees and honeybees, which nest in large colonies, solitary bees lay individual eggs along a line of a cell like this. When the female has finished nesting in each individual stem, she seals it off with a nice big blob of mud or a piece of leaf. So to build the bee hotel, we have a simple box structure here, and I've cut all the pieces to size. So you have 2 side pieces, a back, 2 roof panels, and a base and a middle shelf. It's very easy to just screw them together like so. Now we just flip it over and we add the base, like so. The middle piece just slots in. So we just do the roof panels, which need to fit on the roof like that so they're flush with a slight overhang. And then just turn this on its side and then just screw these pieces together so they're really flush. Like that. So next we just need to cut pieces of stem to size. Use the depth of the box to measure the length that each stem needs to be, and then just pop it in. It needs to be just a bit shorter than the depth of the box, so when it rains the stems don't get wet. So here we've got a cardoon stem, we've also got some fennel and bamboo and sunflower stems. A hollow stem is perfect for solitary bees, and make sure you have a variety of different diameter holes. Some species like red mason bees nest in quite large holes, but other bees, the harebell bee, it's Britain's smallest bee, and it nests in holes of just 1 millimetre to 2 millimetres in diameter, so really tiny holes there. I really like using these perspex tubes because you can simply see at the end of the season, if you pull one out, you can see all the nests that have been made in there, and it's really lovely to look at. So just fill this box up so it eventually looks a bit like that. If you want to paint it you can, but do use a water-based, wildlife-friendly paint, and don't paint the inside, leave that as bare wood. And then hang your bee hotel in the sunniest point of the garden so it bakes all day and it will be full of bees.
As soon as spring arrives, plants start into vigorous growth, and that needs to be supported by moisture from the soil, but also from plenty of nutrition. So plant feeding is really crucial in the spring. If those plants are to take up that water and those nutrients, then their roots need to be growing strongly too. And the first thing I like to feed with is superphosphate. Sprinkle this around the surface of the soil and lightly fork it in, and it'll be washed down towards the plant roots, and it'll encourage them to grow. The other thing that you can start to think about feeding as soon as the weather warms up is an organic fertiliser, something like blood, fish and bone. That can be applied again, sprinkled around plants and also across the surface of vegetable beds that you're going to plant out in a week or so's time. That will give a really good general purpose feed because it contains lots of nitrogen, again lots of phosphate, but also a little base dressing of potash. If you're not bothered about being organic, then you could go for something like Grow More. Now this is probably one of the cheapest, and it has a very even balance of nutrition. Equal parts, 7 parts of nitrogen, 7 parts of phosphate and 7 parts of potash. And this is a really good base dressing for all sorts of things. Remember though that it contains high levels of nitrogen, so if there's a frost still likely to happen, if you apply this too early, it can be taken up by the plants and make them produce very soft, sappy growth that can be affected by frost. So rather than Grow More, I like to use this fertiliser. Now this is called Vitax Q4. It's a pelleted fertiliser. This has lower levels of nitrogen than the Grow More, and it's got quite a high level of potash in it. It's got a reasonable amount of phosphate, so that's good for root growth. But the good thing is, being lower in nitrogen, that means that it won't encourage the plants to grow quite so sappily and be so prone to frost. So it's really good for applying around fruit bushes, summer flowering shrubs, and it's also good for digging into beds and borders where you're going to plant out bedding plants. You could also add a slow or a controlled release fertiliser like these Osmocote granules. They are activated both by temperature and moisture in the soil. These are really good because the nutrients aren't just released willy-nilly, they're released when the plants can use them to their best ability, and they also last in the soil for a good 6 months. And then the other thing that's really worth thinking about is applying a tonic. Now this one is called Uncle Tom's Rose Tonic, and it's really brilliant for roses, but it's also good for shrubs as well. Dilute it, you take off this screw cap here, and then you squeeze the canister to fill up the little reservoir, and that gives you a measured dilution dose to put in a watering can. It's not high in nitrogen, so it won't encourage soft growth, but it will actually toughen the leaves up, and it's a general all-round tonic for all sorts of different plants. So there you have it, spring feeding in a nutshell.
If you've enjoyed this video, then why not like and subscribe, and join me again next month for a whole host of different exciting garden jobs you can be getting on with.